All right, let's go ahead and get started today. First, a reminder that tomorrow is when the first reflection essay is due. Information of the assignment is on Blackboard, so make sure to take a look at that and make sure that you complete that by tomorrow. So the first one's due tomorrow. If for some reason you don't get it in on tomorrow, you can turn it in up to 2 days late. You lose a letter point or a letter grade each day that it is late. So make sure to get them in on time. We're in the midst of talking about kind of the middle of the 4th century politically, and actually some things toward the end of the 4th century, as Christianity went from being a persecuted religion to a religion that was the official religion of the Roman Empire. And we talked about how that presented a challenge for the emperors in thinking about how they were to be Christians as well as emperor. And specifically we talked about some of the challenges that Theodosius faced towards the end of towards the end of the 4th century. Theodosius, as for making the Christian religion the official religion of the Roman Empire, outlawed pagan sacrifices, closed down temples, forbid any sort of pagan worship, public or private, and named Christianity the state religion. Right, so he has gone through a variety he represents kind of a variety of changes that have taken place in the 4th century, from kind of the toleration of Christianity to the free exercise to the end of state support of paganism to now the end of official sanction of paganism and the full support of Christianity. With this change, of course, came new ways of thinking about culture and society. How does the church relate to the world around it? Now, let's think and talk about this a little bit. We're now in a position where Christianity is the state religion. How does that make you, how is a Christian living in the middle of the 4th century to the late 4th century, how does that make you think about culture differently? The world around you. I'm sorry.
You can judge from my position. That's your time back. I think even if just from my time position, culture can be different. It's a change.
Yeah, but thinking about, let's think back to how Christians, what are some of the ways Christians thought about society in the 2nd and 3rd century? How did they approach culture from a theoretical standpoint?
Either be removed from it or be part of it, not of it, or immerse yourself in it.
Right. Yeah. So there's this one way is kind of trying to remove yourself completely. The other way, trying to find a way to bring balance, or trying to find a way to integrate, or use the things of pagan culture to express Christianity. But that's in a situation, that's in a culture where Christianity is marginalized, sometimes persecuted. So now that it's the state religion, how do you think Christians would, either from your own thinking or what you remember from the reading, how would you think about culture and society differently now that Christianity is the official religion of the empire?
Well, before you probably have to consider it more as like an approach to radical change. Everyone's against Christianity, so I need to influence people in a positive way. but when it's positively viewed in society, you kind of take back to that radical change mindset and more like I'm trying to integrate it into society and make sure everything's okay, I guess.
All right, so you kind of have a little bit of a different perception because of, you know, the attitudes of the culture around you. How else do you think you might look at culture differently? Going from persecuted, marginalized religion to, right, imperial support.
Well, I mean, we have what I've read. There's evidence that the government and the people that are higher up in society kind of take to Christianity just because it's legalized now and kind of start bringing in Roman culture into the church. And I mean, that just creates a problem for people that have been in it all along. It kind of makes them look into, well, you only became a Christian because it was legalized and it's a popular thing to do instead of it actually meaning something to you. But then again, they're like, okay, Christianity is legal now, so we're glad you're here, but don't try to bring all your stuff into it. And so it kind of creates a little tension in between people that have been there all along and the new people coming in because it's legalized.
Yeah, I mean, Christianity in a sense almost becomes a fad for certain people, right? In the sense of, well, it's got support, the emperor's doing it, you know, why don't we do it as well?
Well, trying to think about it from our perspective now, think about how our country was formed and the ideals that was formed upon, and the God created men that started what we have now. And now Christianity is kind of being persecuted once again, and we're kind of having another versus that in what they experienced then.
Yeah, in the minds of it, a lot of people, there's just kind of transformation that's taking place, using the reverse. And we'll talk more about that as we get to the 18th century. So in many respects, we would probably say that the likelihood exists that your view towards culture and society would probably change as a Christian when you move from a position of, I'm on the outskirts of society, to now the empire saying, this is okay, and we want everybody to do this. It's sanctioned culturally. But should your view towards culture and society change simply because who is in power?
It shouldn't, but it does.
Yeah, it shouldn't, but it does. Yeah, that's a good point. Which I think kind of brings us back to that question we asked before. What is the Christian view of society? How are we supposed to look at that aspect of the world that is not the church?
I think a lot of times the majority of Christians look at society and say society should be Christian society. And that makes a good point about the founding fathers having, of America having, fearing God. But ultimately, I think people take that as ideas to too far an extent and say America was a Christian nation, founded on Christian principles. Well, there are certain Christian principles, but most guys were Christians, and some were kind of blasphemous beliefs. So many think that society should be Christian, America should be a Christian nation again, per se, instead of saying people need to be Christians rather than society. God already told us in Scripture, respect your governing authorities, leaders, do what they tell you to do. He put them in that place to rule and be rulers and pray for them. He doesn't say overthrow your rulers' authorities because I didn't place them there and somebody else voted for them, and it's not my fault they got there, it's your fault, so you need to turn Christian. Well, no, he said God put them there where they are. We have perspective, doesn't mean we have to do things to do. And so I think sometimes we get confused thinking we need to have a Christian society, when the real Christian society is the church. If the church is going to grow, we've got to reach out to the individual people to create a real Christian society. It's not about the government. It's about the people who are willing to submit to God.
Other thoughts?
I think usually just a few countries that's the government sanctions a religion and then requires it. You don't get genuine Christianity, you get fear and decisions out of fear. And that was not God's intention.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you raise an interesting point, Trish. When you think about what do you do with as a Christian, let's say Christian emperor in the 4th century, and we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday. What do you do about heresy? As a Christian ruler, what do you do about heresy?
It's kind of based on and yes, exactly being a Christian ruler.
You are a ruler that identifies as a Christian. You've been baptized. You worship Jesus, and
I think you can't force Christianity on people. And so if I was, constantly, and I was a Christian, I would definitely encourage Christianity because that's what I believed in. But at the same time, I'm not going to force it on people because they have to come to it on their own. And, you put laws into place, not where they are forced to believe certain things, but just to keep them safe, and, like murder and all those big things, but also kind of make the laws to where it's easier to fall into Christianity than it is, where you have all these temptations around you, and to kind of limit those.
yeah, I completely agree that idea of free choice. But on the other hand, if you have a big squabble over a theological issue as emperor, what's your concern? Well, first you're probably concerned about the theology, but what other concerns do you have to keep in mind? Yeah, what's going to happen if this kind of spills out of the church and people really get violent about it? As we see when we get to the Reformation period, right? People disagreeing between Catholics and Protestants, and we have the 30 Years' War. As a Christian emperor, handing down rules, do you outlaw sin?
I think there's a reason why we've always separated church and state, usually, because we understand whenever we combine them, that never works. I mean, just like America, the reason why we say it's founded on Christian principles is because, some of the founding fathers were Christian, and usually everybody in America was Christian, but they understood that you can't just impose religious activity on people, because it is eventually a decision. And if you can be moral or immoral, that's your own free will. And you can't, as an emperor, you cannot say, you cannot do this, because that will make people want to do it even more.
But aren't there some sins that are outlawed?
I think when it comes to outlawing sin, it should only be outlawed by a person who has the authority and the amount of authority given them by God to outlaw that sin. And so if it's Constantine within Protestant Christianity and a heretic comes to him, he says he doesn't care about God anymore and he wants to live his own life, live his life, leave the church, and prove that he killed 2 priests in the church. Well, he violated the law, therefore Constantine has the authority to deal with that lost person. But if somebody brings someone to Constantine and says that he doesn't like the church anymore, he doesn't want to be part of the church, and he says here he's leaving and he's talking to some people within the church. Well, that's the authority of the church elders or bishops or whatever to practice church discipline. That's not Constantine's authority, so he doesn't have anything to punish this man by the law because he hasn't broken the laws of the land, per se.
Okay, well, I mean, but in an imperial situation, who makes the laws of the land? The emperor does, probably.
As, making the law and trying to decipher between, what should and should not happen, and putting punishment in place, you have to consider the people at that time and, what they're used to, what they think is right and what they think is wrong, as a whole. And you try and, if you drastically change everything, you're gonna have revolt, like when, in the 20 states, you did away with alcohol and did away with alcohol.
Prohibition.
Right, yeah. And then there was the revolt and everything, and they didn't listen to the law. You can't just do that. You have to gradually make better adjustments as you go, and that's the best way to approach it. So, like, if they know that murder is wrong, but it still happens, you can make that a law and be like, you cannot murder, because they already have it in their minds and their conscience that it is wrong.
But as a Christian emperor, I mean, I see what you're saying, Kelly, but as a Christian emperor, would that mean that you're allowing people to do things? I mean, wouldn't that make morality kind of, instead of hard and fast, kind of looser? I mean, so we say, okay, murder's wrong. A large majority of people would agree murder's wrong. Killing in some situations is okay, but murder, right? Just killing somebody, not in wartime, killing is wrong. Okay, no matter whether you're pagan or a Christian, fine. We'll have a law against killing. What about adultery? Should a Christian emperor try to pass a law against adultery?
It depends on how big the problem is.
Should it depend upon the problem, or should the emperor act because it's sinful?
I don't think the government should ever be reactive, with wait and see. If it's an issue for people and they make a law, I think you have to make those decisions before.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us are talking. We're talking ideally, right? Ideally, people would get together and talk about these things. But in real bodies, right? You're a Christian emperor, meaning you want to follow Christ, and part of following Christ is living a moral life. So, how far do you go in? I mean, do you make it a requirement that people worship on Sunday, that they don't engage in any work, that they are to be in church on Sunday?
If you accept Christianity and you accept the Bible for what it is, then you're allowing God's will to impose on your beliefs, your wants, your own desires. But as a Christian man, you can't impose your will on other people. You're kind of taking on God's will, but then again, you can't make somebody do something. So, I mean, in this sense, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I'm going to try to bring it back around, I promise. But in this sense, he's a Christian in his own life. But his job is kind of be an emperor of people. Now, just because you live by the will of God does not mean that you impose that will on other people, because the will of God says you can take this if you want it. And if you don't want it, then you don't have to take it. Because that's not going to lead you where you want to go. Yeah, I think it goes back to the authority that's given to you by God simply as a Christian. We look at God and thought, okay, well, God, per se, outlaws sin. Yeah, he outlaws it all, but then he provided a way for you to have mercy and be saved from punishment of that sin. Committing that sin. Talk about, I can't remember which epistle it is, that talks about how mercy triumphs over judgment. And then you have the situation in John 8, I thought it was Jesus, John chapter 8, where one who committed adultery unlawfully, Jesus let her go. And so it comes back to, I think, what authority has been given you by God to be able to enact, the punishment against heresy. There's always going to be, because obviously the problem is sin. If people are going to sin, everyone's going to sin. And so to say, should I outlaw sin, is to say, should we all just die because we all sin? So it's kind of a hard question.
There's a man that goes to Lionel who owns a business, and he refuses to open up his business on Sundays and Wednesdays after 4 o'clock. But he doesn't force his employees to go to church. He doesn't force them to go to Bible study, anything. He doesn't say, if you don't go, I'm not going to give you a paycheck. But he gives them the opportunity to kind of set those guidelines for them to maybe make the right decision in that time.
And that's leadership with Christ's example. I mean, you don't see Christ in any of the Gospels saying, if you don't follow me, then I'm going to arrest you, or I'm going to punish you, or fine you. Like, that's not the way he gains followers. And as a ruler, I mean, there are certain things that are sinful that also interrupt, like, civil peace. Things like murder and rape and robbery that I think, yes, like, those are sins, yet they're things that if you want to have a peaceful society, you have to outlaw those things. But you don't, if you're trying to rule like Christ, you don't require worship.
Okay, so you're trying to rule like Christ. Does that mean a Christian ruler should never go to war? Because we're to turn the other cheek. Love our enemies.
That maybe comes down to one of those issues of like matters of conscience, possibly.
But I think turn the other cheek is pretty explicit.
It really is.
But I mean, there's examples of, it depends on why you're going to war, I guess. It's because, I mean, you know, you had war in Israel.
Yeah, there was war in Israel, but as Christians, right, aren't we? I mean, Jesus said, right, Matthew chapter 5. You've heard that it was said, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Right? But I say unto you, turn the other cheek.
It depends on the reason for the war. If the reason for the war is, you know, to kind of punish for the sins that they're creating, that the people who are against you are having against you. No, hold on. Like, if the reason is because they're harming your country and you need that peace and you don't fight back, then, you know, they're going to take over and then, you know, you don't have control of your country anymore.
So you can punish...
If it's because, just because, you know, they stole something of yours and you're going to go back and full forces to get it back, you know, from the stall, then no.
So you can punish another country for its sins, but you can't punish your own people for their sins.
I think it's situational.
Yeah.
So morality is situational.
No.
Now you're arguing like you're on the internet. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead, Ian.
I don't believe in situational ethics at all, but I do believe that self-defense has nothing to do with your ethics. Because if I go to someone and shoot them with a gun, obviously that's wrong. I'm definitely wrong with that. But if someone is out who does that to me, my first reaction is to A, get away from this person, B, if I can't get away from them, I have to take them down, lest I lose my life, right?
Well, yeah, but what does turn the other cheek mean then?
Yeah, I think that's very straightforward and easy to understand. And we're also given in Scripture the example of, you know, take like the marriage things are said in Ephesians that a husband is supposed to love his wife the way Christ loves the church. Well, Christ laid his life down for the church in protection of her. So I think there's some level of, there's a reason for defending those who are not as able to defend, which in the point of the government might be your people.
If there were a need for a defense scheme to an extent, there would be no need to discipline children. Because children don't know any better than some of the dumb and bad things they do. So parents enforce that to teach them, and the children know life better, more peaceful.
Well, I think there's a difference between discipline and defense. I think that's not the same. I see what you're saying, Aaron, but
I'm just talking more along the lines of violence, physical violence, in the sense of, you know, is this person going to rob your house and kill my wife and not feel bad about it because they don't care and they're never going to care unless they're talking the other way, and you teach the right way and stop this person.
But does Jesus give us that out?
don't think that he necessarily gives us the out, but I think that's where his grace and mercy is going to say, you know what, I'm willing to, I think God would forgive me of an act of that, in the sense that I'm not going to kill a man out of cold blood or out of, warm blood. Well, did God give, did Paul give Simon the sorcerer the out, the Simon the millionaire, and asked, hey, can I have some of this power? No, he disciplined him, not necessarily in the business sense, but he did discipline him. Does God give us the out about, or teach about disciplining children? We know that that's would be a very good thing to do. So if there's someone who is childlike in understanding and needs to be disciplined, like I said, this is more so along the line of violence than war, per se.
Well, yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily call discipline violence, though. I mean,
you're talking about, you can't talk about discipline in war, because war is literally killing somebody on the other side. It's totally different. Yeah, it's not whipping somebody into understanding. It's killing them for something that their commanders might have commanded them to do.
I think that war should only be in defense. Like the Muslims, the reason they're over there is because they're threatening to come overseas to murder us.
Well, then that goes back to the Trinity of Chief principle.
And a lot of that goes way back to the Crusades, when a lot of Christians decided they were going to go to Muslim-controlled lands and take them over.
I do think that scripture, there's several examples of even Jesus standing up for the rights of those that couldn't stand up for themselves. You mentioned the woman in adultery earlier, or even in the temple when he goes in and turns over the tables and calls out to these people who were using the temple as a place of business. And we're told that true Christianity in James is to take care of the widow and the orphan. If my Christian husband, if somebody was attacking me and he was like, I can't do this because I'm trying to get a key, I'd be very disappointed in that.
Jesus is like, I got a new topic to talk about. What if I were?
I think we're giving an example of defending those that can't defend themselves.
Yeah, but, and again, I understand it, but how far do you go with that?
First Timothy chapter something.
That is book, chapter, and verse right here. First something says.
But it says if you don't provide for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. Or if you don't care for your relatives, you're worse than an unbeliever. So does that providing and that caring for your relatives umbrella protect you? I mean, is that played into it?
But do we make that step? Is that a legitimate hermeneutical step between providing for my family, acting in defense, to engaging in violence in a political cause?
Another thing, though, whenever you take the turn the other cheek context, it's hard to say, can you put that on an empire platform? Can you put that on a governmental platform to where, okay, say, the Western Empire of Rome slaps the Eastern Empire of Rome in the face. Which does that mean that literally they have to just stop and not do anything? Or does that mean that they have the right to invade with an army? Is it, it just seems like slap another person in the cheek. That's a one-on-one reference. Compared to somebody holding a gun in your face, or holding a gun in your wife's face, and you defending her. I feel like that's a totally different ballgame.
It's like it's cause and effect. If you don't attack me, you don't go on the defensive side and defend your country because they're going to take over. Your people are going to be murdered because of your lack of action.
Now, do you all have more than your feelings on this subject to back that up? Because we've been talking, we got turn the other cheek. And then we have all these, defense and response and difference between an individual and a governmental scale. Where do you get this guidance that you can make that conclusion?
I would love to say Old Testament God's people, but everybody's God's people now, so we can't.
Well, yeah, if we turn back to the Old Testament, then that goes back to the emperor having the right to outlaw slaves.
everybody else in history. So forth.
Look, can I ask a question here?
First Timothy something.
First Timothy something.
This might apply more so to a one-on-one violent state, but the context of it was political. This is going to sound funny when I ask this question, but you'll see what I'm trying to say. Was it right for Superman to kill General Zod at the end of Man of Steel?
I'm going to go.
Because General Zod was destroying Earth. His plan and 100% intention is I'm going to wipe out the earth, every single thing and person on this earth. I don't care if I hate everyone. And so he's got that laser ray thing going, and Superman's got him in a chokehold, and he's saying, you need to stop it. He gives him one last chance. He says, you need to stop it. You basically repent for your actions. You got to stop this. God said, never, I will never stop you without the kill like I came to 4 or 5 people. So Superman's dead. Was that right for Superman to do?
I think it's
I don't know.
I really do. I think it's common sense. Like, I don't think that you necessarily have, like, that's engraved inside of us, you know.
But it's also, it is engraved inside of us to sin, or if you will. It's like we're bound to do that. So we're bound to think a certain way, to think, okay, well, maybe it's good, but it's actually not.
I mean, and, you know, wouldn't the world be better if the emperor, who now has this power, can constrain sin through imperial decree?
In theory, it would be. But how does one man have the right to constrain somebody's free will that way? How do we, if I were an emperor, where would I have the God-given right to act like discipline upon the earth for somebody else's problems or sins?
Romans 13.
Yes.
Romans 13. God established his government, and they do not wield the sword in vain.
Okay.
Right? I mean, I'm not saying that's what that says, but I could see a Christian emperor saying, Romans 13, right? God established his government. He has put me here. He did not wield the sword in vain. That means I can use the sword to punish evildoers.
And I think God's going to keep that in check as far as whatever kind of laws or decrees that kingdom sets out. They're either going to get passed, shot down, righted against, to where it's held in check by God. But if God wanted to give out a set of lists and rules for people to follow Christianity, then we wouldn't be talking about government. He would have already done it through the Bible.
Matt, I think you had a little bit more you were going to say.
I'm sorry, Matt. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. My mind doesn't work before I can process more than one thing.
I bring all of that up to say this was a very complex issue for Christians in the 4th century. Right? It's a little bit different for us in the 21st century because we do have a relative separation between church and state. And no matter what we think should happen, things did happen. Right? And some of the things that we say, well, you shouldn't do, emperors did. The cultural leak from paganism, I think, is a very important part of it. Go ahead, Matt.
Look at it this way. In the time of, well, not now that they're not still opposed, but in the beginnings of papal reign, when they were commanding armies and they were in charge of things or whatever, well, the Pope is supposed to be the vicar of Christ on earth, but yet you see in times past that man is supposed to be Christ on earth is also been one of the single people who live. Somebody with such a power, I don't see, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. But,
which I think in one sense ultimately encourages us to ask, in our day and age, do we really want a Christian government? And if we want a Christian government, what would that look like? But let's head back to the 4th century before we start talking about the modern period, which we'll get to. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay.